Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith once again. This time about a card that, once again, fight night card. We've had a lot of those in the first quarter of 2025. But the most interesting fight on it, the co-main event, a huge upset. Bo Nickal losing to Reinier de Ridder by TKO in round 2. A lot of people saying it's the end of the Bo Nickal hype train. Want to break that down just a little bit now. There are two things you have to know about Bo Nickal's trajectory and his career. Those two things are, and I'll break them down individually. Number one, the difficulty of having an MMA career post an international wrestling career. That's number one. Number two is the difficulty in learning on the job in the UFC or combat sports, period. So let's back up a little bit. Looking at the technique of the fight. The difficulty I had in previous fights with Bo Nickal, I think I picked him in every fight he had up until this point, is Bo Nickal, if you don't know, 3-time national champion at Penn State, tried for an international career. Unfortunately, there were guys above him internationally, so he couldn't make the Olympic team, world team, stuff like that at the senior level. But I think he had an under 23 title, stuff like that. So, but the senior level, which is adults out of college, he wasn't going to get there with David Taylor in his way. So, but tried that international route. That's going to be important later. Came into the UFC, had a very, very, was 7-0 before his loss last Saturday, but started his MMA career, he had one fight before coming on the Contender Series, won both of those in the first round, and got fast-tracked immediately to the UFC, a ton of hype behind him, all this stuff. So a very, very short career leading into the UFC. When you looked at his skill set in previous fights, it wasn't that his wrestling was great and his striking wasn't great or his submission game wasn't great. It was his inability to kind of flow it all together. And that's what I look for when someone is a standout in one style and they're learning the other pieces. Not that the other pieces are bad or they're god-awful at the other pieces, but your ability to kind of mix it all together in an MMA way, that takes A, a lot of years in the gym, and B, those 10 or 15 fights before you get in the UFC. A lot of guys starting out on the local level, the regional scene, are good at one thing and expanding their game. And it's those 7 or 8 fights where you're winning maybe in the first or second round. You're winning pretty quick generally if you're a standout guy. But that's when you learn to integrate your whole game together. And Bo Nickal, in his previous UFC fights, we had seen, good wrestling. His striking was coming along. It still wasn't very good. But his ability to kind of go right to the takedown off a strike, to confuse you with something, to get in a scramble, to bang, 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 outside trip. Those things where Bo Nickal knows the outside trip, but a good MMA wrestler will integrate that into the rest of his game. Matt Hughes was the first guy to really do it, where he would throw this overhand right, boom, and then right into a double leg. So that ability to kind of disguise what you're good at with your other skill sets. You're not just going in, with a blind takedown. And Bo Nickal hadn't quite gotten it all together. You saw that he was developing, that his wrestling was his major thing, but his wrestling also, he hadn't quite figured out how to make it all go. So that was my trouble going to this fight against de Ridder, who is an excellent fighter, who's really, really well put together and came up through MMA in a way that he didn't have a lot of glaring deficiencies. Ta-da! So anyway, that being said, and I think that was his downfall in this fight, in that, did get an early takedown, ended up going for a guillotine, ended up on bottom. You saw he wasn't comfortable in half guard. Not that it was that bad. He didn't fall apart completely, but that ability to transition and scramble, get back to his feet wasn't quite there. Didn't look comfortable on his feet. Looked really like it was costing him a lot of energy to strike because he wasn't quite sure how to do it and wrestle at the same time. Those little parts of the game, once again, didn't quite all fit. Going right into the TKO. So why didn't it fit? Right? What's the background here? What you have to understand about most standout wrestlers in MMA, there's a pattern of All-American a couple times, maybe a national title in there, but you aren't the guy. Because if you aren't the guy, having graduated from Penn State, Oklahoma State, Iowa, whatever, you're not going to be trying to make an Olympic team. You're not going to be trying to make a world team. So the vast majority of wrestlers in MMA stopped at 21, 22, decided to go into MMA, and learned a skill set in their early 20s, right? So you graduate from college. You may have once again, All-American a couple times. Maybe you have a national title. You don't have 3 or 4 where you're looking for a world team or an Olympics. So you go, what am I going to do with my athletic life? I'm 21, 22. You start training MMA, and you pick up the skills as you go along. If you want to go to an Olympics, if you want to make a world team, that is another at least 3 or 4 years of your prime. So you aren't starting MMA until your mid to late 20s, which is way different than starting it at 21 or 22. And guys who do that have a lot of trouble building a complete MMA skill set because they're starting 3 or 4 years later than they would have. Now, is it the kiss of death? Not necessarily, but God, it's hard, especially in modern MMA, where everyone's so good. You don't see a lot of deficiencies. And having one style, even like kind of having a backbone kind of style, it's tough. You have to be really well-rounded, okay? So, in losing those crucial years might not sound like a lot, but there's a huge difference athletically between a 21, 22-year-old and a 26, 27-year-old. And so Bo Nickal started out late because he tried an international career. Senior freestyle, the last time he wrestled was 2021, and once again lost to David Taylor twice. That was for the Olympic team trials, and then went into MMA. A great example, a guy who kind of followed this trajectory as well was Ben Askren, who made an Olympic team, who, as you know, 2-time national champion, 4-time finalist, made an Olympic team, didn't place in the Olympics, went to MMA. He never had a complete skill set. It was, I'm going to use my wrestling until someone can stop it. And as soon as someone did, I thought he had the worst striking I've ever seen at the elite level of MMA. He just couldn't build a whole game starting when he did. So, excellent wrestling, good submission game, not world class, but good. And god-awful striking. You just pay a price starting out late. You can't develop everything. And that was the price Ben paid. And he was able to, but in Ben's case, he went to Bellator, didn't have a lot of great wrestlers in Bellator. Bjorn didn't like signing those guys. And so he was also in a promotion where that really wasn't going to get exposed until he fought Jay Haran. So he was also in kind of a safe place for the first, whatever it was, dozen or so fights of his career, where he didn't have to take on anybody else that had any wrestling background that could stop him. And so he really didn't get exposed until he went to the UFC, and he fought guys who could stop his takedown for a minute. Damian Maia actually, of course, able to make it a ground battle that he couldn't win. So, but Ben kind of showed that same limited skill set of starting late after trying to make an Olympic team, something like that. Look, Henry Cejudo, what about him? He won an Olympic gold medal. He didn't go to college. So Cejudo won it. He was like 21. And so it's basically the same age normal, wrestlers graduate from college. So Henry Cejudo, for people who don't know, won an Olympic gold medal and never wrestled in college. So he kind of skipped the line, went to the Olympics, won a gold medal, and then went into MMA. So he started kind of at the same time that a lot of people do, which is 21, 22 years old. So he started early and was able to acquire other skills on the way up. DC made 2 Olympic teams, but the rule of thumb is the heavier you are, the more limited you could be. Started out in heavyweight, where he couldn't do a whole lot, but could wrestle, and was able to use that when he needed to, developed other skills, and people were really good light heavyweight. He's kind of the only exception to the rule of somebody having an international wrestling career in modern MMA, starting late and doing great things and being an all-time great. But man, it's difficult to do. Very difficult, right? To use up your talents in a sport like wrestling or the NFL and turn around and go, I'm going to do MMA now. Like, all right, you're getting a late start. Your body's already been through a lot, and you're behind the 8 ball. Right? Everybody else is ahead of you. So that was number one. Bo Nickal was going to have trouble because those extra years he spent trying to make an Olympic team until 2020 or 2021, and then, having to start late. I think that was the number one thing that hurt him. Number two, of course, as I mentioned earlier, it's really hard to learn on the job in the UFC. And what I mean by that is I had a boxing coach years ago tell me at the Broadway Boxing Gym in LA, he said, Mike Tyson could have been a lot better. I was like, what? Mike was an absolute destroyer. And he said, look at Mike's schedule. Early on in his career, that guy fought twice a month. He fought all the time, like an old school Sugar Ray Robinson schedule. He was fighting all the time. And he said, you don't get better training for a fight. When you're training for a fight, we're trying to get you ready for the guy you're going to fight. We're not building your overall skill set. You do that in between fights, right? If you have a fight, with somebody, you go to the gym, you start working on stuff, and then you get the call saying, hey, we're going to fight so-and-so. Then the task shifts from building your skill set to getting ready for a particular person. And he said Mike never had those gaps to flush out his overall game because he was fighting all the time. He was always getting ready for someone. Now, you guys can argue in the comment section all day whether or not you think that's true. I don't know enough. I had a coach tell me that. But I know for a fact in MMA, right, where I do have coaching experience, it's really hard to broaden someone's skill set while they are getting ready for an elite fighter in an elite fight. When you are on the local scene and you're fighting some dude, you don't know them anyway. You have no idea what they're good at, what they're not good at. You might know the team they come from. They don't switch it on you last minute. So you're never really getting ready for a particular person. You're getting better yourself. You're working on your skill set because you could be fighting the man on the moon in 3 weeks. You don't know. So when I was getting ready for local fights, I didn't know my opponent at all. I would just get ready to make me better. Once you're in the UFC, man, it's almost always fight camp. And so the idea that I'll get better in between, you certainly can. Fighters do improve while in the UFC, but it's almost like improving your basketball in the NBA. You're expected to know and have all of your fundamentals. Make that very, very clear. Your fundamentals have to be good by the time you get to the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball. Whatever it is, no one's going to go, okay, here's how you throw a football. You better know how to do that before you get there. Now, you'll work on various things for the play or that particular team or blah, 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 whatever. But your fundamentals all have to be together to make it in a major sports league. The UFC is a major league. So that's kind of the issue here is Bo Nickal started late. So his skill set was, very, very wrestling centric. And then he's in the UFC where you're expected to have all of the tools because you're often getting ready for a particular guy and there isn't all the time in the world to work on that skill set itself. Period. So those were the two things that really were difficult for David Taylor. And I don't mean just with this particular loss. I mean, in previous fights, you could see the kind of he doesn't have it all really together. He's not quite doing everything he needs to do. If you watch Johnny Manziel starting for the Cleveland Browns, you went, I don't know if you're going to make it in the NFL. Now, not that you can't get better. And he was working on those things. But this is a hard place to do that. And having his second fight on Dana White's Contender Series didn't do him any favors because now you're under a spotlight and you're expected to really perform, much like, a first-round draft pick doesn't get the time a third-rounder. It doesn't cost very much money. And, first-rounders, they expect something out of their investment in the first couple years. Third-rounder, fourth-rounder, they're not spending a lot of money. They can afford to develop you a little bit. UFC is not a development place for the most part once you're out of Contender Series and stuff like that. So the other thing was he was an average minus, I think, 1350 favorite in his fights leading up to the de Ridder fight. So also he was such a big favorite in all these fights. Fans were getting okay, this guy's got to fight somebody. He wasn't ready to fight somebody. So I think maybe behind the scenes, Dana White and matchmakers of the UFC, they're not stupid. They're like, okay, he might have trouble beating the elite guys. And they were, sandbagging as much as they could, hoping he picked up those other skills in the meantime. And that's just really unrealistic and difficult to do. So can he right the ship and come back? The problem is, the problems I mentioned don't go away. You're 29 years old. You're only going to take off at this point. By beating better talent, he could reset a little bit, take on a guy who's not as good, but then you're right back to where you were a few months ago. And You have to acquire those skills. I don't know if and how he's going to do that. Usually by 29, you are what you are, right? Rarely do we see, wow, this guy really improved and got really amazing at 30. You physically sometimes get, man strength. You get a little bit, stronger, late 20s, okay? But your fundamentals don't particularly change. I don't know anyone who had, I'm going through my mental Rolodex here, in modern MMA who really showed me anything late 20s, early 30s, like, man, they're a different fighter now. Once again, other than some guys get a little tougher and a little bit stronger. Dustin Poirier, for example, I think got stronger a little bit later in his career. But tactically, Justin Gaethje made some adjustments. But quick proviso, Justin Gaethje, I think, had the fundamentals. I think he made bad choices in fights, and he grew up a little bit. Right? It wasn't like he wasn't capable of fighting like he did against Tony Ferguson in previous fights. It's just he didn't choose to fight that way. And I think he made smarter choices. But once again, if we're talking about accumulating fundamentals, I think Justin Gaethje had those fundamentals. He knew how to do everything, and it flowed together very, very well. He just made poor choices. And I think you can improve that a lot easier than you can acquiring fundamental skills. That makes sense to everybody. So I'm not saying it's impossible he'll turn it around. It's extremely rare that you pick up and really refine fundamentals at 29 in the UFC. But we'll have to see. Let me know what you think about his future in the comments section. I appreciate all of you. I'll be talking to you soon.